Hello guys! In this lesson we'll be talking about the VFB for V-Ray. I have a similar scene prepared as for the Corona example. I just add the V-Ray sun here to have a complete scene. Okay, so let's open the V-Ray VFB window. We can right-click and choose it from here. Or we can go to Render Setup, Frame Buffer, and click Show Last VFB. So let's start interactive rendering, and we'll discuss the frame buffer. Okay, so on the right-hand side, we have a history panel. It has the same function as in Corona. To make it work, we need to go to the options and choose history. Click Enabled to turn it on. You can choose to use a project location to save the images from the history panel, or you can choose another folder manually. You can also click Autosave if you want, but it will automatically save each version of the image. We can also change other things, but it's not really necessary. We need to, of course, save and close. I choose some folder just as an example. And now, the options are available to use. By clicking this icon with the plus, we save the image in the history panel. And we can save another versions the same way. The same as in Corona, we can use A/B testing. Just click here and click on the image you want to have as A first, and secondly, another one. And here we go. We can compare these images the same way as in Corona. We can click the cross icon to delete the image. Or we can click the check icon to have the image as a main preview in the frame buffer. Let's go to the options so I can show you some things that may be useful for you here. In the render view, you can control the zoom multiplier that multiplies the zoom for one mouse click. Let me show you. Okay, in the next panel we have two options that are enabled by default. When the first one is checked, the controls are visible only when we hover over the render region. While when disabled, the controls are always visible. And show region sizes, when checked, the size value of all four sides of the render region rectangle is visible. I basically leave it as it is, however, if you want to change it, you can do it here. The History tab we've already discussed. The layers are dedicated to these layers here. This tab specifies a location to store the layer 3 presets. So in the preset path, we choose where the layer 3 presets are saved. And here we have all shortcuts that can be used in the frame buffer. You can add some, change or remove old ones if you wish here. Okay, now let's talk about the other things. In the file, we can save the current channel, so the current pass. We can save all channels with render elements if we have any added, to separate files. We can also save all channels to one file. It saves the image to a single multi-channel EXR or VRI-MG file. Or we can load images from the file here as well. If we click Render, we can start interactive rendering or we can render normally. We can also start interactive rendering here and stop it by clicking this icon. We can also refresh the render. If we click here though, it starts the normal rendering. We can use a couple of interesting options from here. For example, we can select the objects in the viewport, and only this object will be rendered. If we choose another one, it looks at the selected objects, so no matter what we do in the viewport, this will be rendered. Lighting renders only the light contribution in the scene. If we choose ambient occlusion, it will render ambient occlusion for the scene. Wireframe renders the scene objects in wireframe. Normals show the normal of the scene objects. And finally, UVs display the UV coordinates of the scene objects. This can help you if you have some issues on the image and you're not sure what is going on. You can quickly check these options and you may find the problem. This icon is for region rendering. By clicking on the icon, we turn on or off the option. This one renders the closest bucket or pixel, depending on the image sampler you chosen, found to the mouse pointer. Let me show you how it works. I changed the image sampler to bucket, as on such a simple scene, it's hard to see with progressive. Okay, let me show you one more thing. Let's change the bucket size so it will be smaller. Here we go. Now we can easily see how it works. So where my mouse is, in these places the buckets are rendered first. And here we have the same options we had in the Render tab. So from here we can save the image. Here we can clear the contents of the frame buffer. By clicking on this dots icon, we can display different channels. This one displays the alpha channel. We can stop rendering. It's exactly the same as we will do here. This option is what we have here. But we can additionally copy the current channel to clipboard. As I said on the occasion of the corona, it can be helpful during the production process. Duplicate to host frame buffer creates a frame buffer copy of the current VFB. And clear image, it's the same option as this one. If we go to the view, we can choose different display color space. Zoom VFB is pretty straightforward. We have a couple of options here to choose from. Channels are the same as what we have here. Test resolution allows us to test the image in different sizes, so as a percentage of the current scene. So we don't have to change it in the frame buffer. We can choose from these options here instead. So you can see that it takes the size from the render setup and renders a percentage of its size. We can choose it here as well. We also have color clamping options and use pixel aspect that enables visualization of the pixel aspect ratio. We also have a panel dedicated to statistics. This performance tab will be the most important as we can check the number of passes and noise threshold here. And we have the whole layers panel. Stamp is a sort of an information tab. If it's on, we can see the most important info here. Display correction. We can change, for example, the lens effect here, so we can turn on or off this effect. We can change the size, intensity, we can add some scratches or obstacles if we load the file. Lens dust. So basically, we can create some lens imperfections that cause specific results. We can control these effects by changing different values. And here, we can control the denoising effect. However, we need to first add a viewer denoiser render element. So let's do it now. And let's re-render. So we can choose between different presets here. We can choose strong, for instance. So you can see before and after. Most of the time, it's good to use default. But we can also set our own settings by changing the strength and radius values. Here we can choose the source. By default is RGB, but if we add light mix to render elements, it will automatically change the source to light mix. Anyway, we can add different layers to achieve different results. It's sort of like in Photoshop. You can, for example, add an exposure layer and adjust these settings here. We can add a couple of the same layers if we need to. We can also add LUTs. However, V-Ray doesn't have built-in LUTs, so we need to use our own. We can of course add curves here, but as in Corona, I rather prefer to add it later on in Photoshop. We can adjust color balance, similarly as in Photoshop. With each layer, we can choose different blend modes. Hue saturation. I like to always reduce the saturation slightly in my images. It creates a more natural look. What else? Filmic tone map. We can choose different types and we'll get different effects. It gives us a lot of control as it contains different types of mapping curves and gamma corrections. You just need to play around with this for a little bit. If we choose background, we can load the image. Let me choose something. Here we go. We can also move it horizontally or vertically. We can also decide how the image should be adjusted. Okay, I showed you how to use the Cryptomate option, but I will use a different scene. So first of all, we need to add some mask render element to test the possibilities. I use Cryptomate, but this option works also with Multimate, Wire Color, and Object Render Material IDs. You need to remember that Cryptomate doesn't work with the Progressive Image Sampler. We need to change it to Bucket. Okay, now we're ready to render. Okay, so here is the rendered image. Let me do quick adjustments here. Let's start with the curves layer. Let's make it more contrasty. Okay, we can add another curves layer, and now we can add the crypto mask by clicking here. These options are available only after the render is finished. Anyway, we can click here to add the objects we want from the mask. To make it easier to see what we picked, we can use Show Preview when selected. Here we go. Awesome, isn't it? We can use this option to remove objects from the selection. Or we can select it from the list and click minus. We can go back to the properties and you can see that it works only on the layers we chose. That's truly remarkable. That works pretty great. Again, we can add another layer and create masking again. This is super cool. So basically, from one image, we can have not only a few lighting scenarios, but also totally different atmospheres and options. If we decided that the mask doesn't work somewhere, we can simply go back to masking and remove it from the list. Okay, that's it for this lesson. See you in the next one.